Time for another board game review, and this time we have the game AEON'S War Eternal. This was sent to me by Indie Boards and Cards and is designed by Kevin Riley. Gravehold remains the last bastion of the world that was. As the otherworldly incursions from the creatures known only as the Nameless intensify, a cadre of strange survivors emerge from the void itself. Is that how you say cadre? I don't know. Will they be Gravehold's salvation or its undoing? So this review is going to be mainly about how AEON'S plays, because they didn't send the first one, but I already own the first one. They sent War Eternal, but I haven't reviewed AEON'S on this channel yet, so this is kind of like how to play and that sort of thing. But I will talk about some of the new characters and the new bosses after the explanation. For those who are interested in what War Eternal has, as opposed to AEON'S End. AEON'S End War Eternal is a cooperative deck-building game where your deck is never shuffled. Your goal is to defeat the Nemesis before your home Gravehold is overrun, or the players are exhausted. Each round, the players and the Nemesis, which is over there, will take turns in a random order. During a player's turn, they will be able to cast spells, acquire additional gems, relics, and spells from the supply over here. Manipulate their spellcasting breaches, these four here, and use their unique abilities. All four of the different nemesis included in the game are unique in the actions taken during their turns, and will require a different strategy to be defeated. So first off, each player starts with a character Matt. This is Mist, and second player will be Mazhadron. They have a starting hand and deck that they always start with. So this tells you that Mist here starts in her hand with a Amethyst Paragon, 3 crystals, and a spark. And her deck always is 3 crystals and 2 sparks. And since you don't shuffle the cards in this game, they are just set like that. Each character should have 4 breaches. This tells you how they're arranged. In this case, this tells you that the yellow side should be facing left, and these should be on the bottom. You also start with 10 life. A player number, and then Gravehold, which is your city, starts at 30 health. This is your turn order deck, and this will tell you randomly who goes in what order. For a 2-player game, you would put 2 player 1 cards and 2 player 2 cards and 2 nemesis cards, and then you'd shuffle it up, and then each card you draw will tell you whose turn it is. In this case, it'd be player 1's turn. If you ever run out of cards in the deck, just shuffle the discard pile and start over. Over here we have our nemesis. In this case, it is the Umbra Titan, and every nemesis has a different setup. In this case, Umbra Titan gains 8 nemesis tokens, and how tokens are used will be explained in the additional rules and in their Unleash descriptions. This particular nemesis starts with a 70 HP. That's what this dial is for. And here's the nemesis deck. Now, every nemesis comes with a selection of cards you have to include, but then you can also include other nemesis cards and shuffle them into specific tiers. So for a 2-player game, this plays 1 through 4, you would shuffle in 3 basic cards with the top 3 tier 1 nemesis cards. So yeah, there's 3 cards for Umbra Titan specifically in here, and 3 cards that you included. Then for the second tier, you would include 5 cards plus the 3. And then in the final tier, you would include 7 random cards plus the Umbra Titan cards. So these will always go down from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. You just shuffle them up in different stacks and make them one deck. And this will unleash monsters and traps for you guys to fight. This is the supply pile. These are the 9 piles of cards that you can purchase from through the game to add to your deck and make them stronger. You've got gems up here, relics, and spells. Gems are the primary source of income in the game. This tells you the cost of the card to purchase it. In this case, it's Frozen Magmite. This gains you 2 Ether. Ether is the currency used to purchase more cards. And when you play Frozen Magmite, you may place the next card you gain this turn on top of your deck. Here's a Scoria Slag. It's a 4-cost card, gain 2 Ether. If the Nemesis tier is 2 or higher, gain an additional Ether, so this is more powerful later. Here's an expensive gem, a 6-cost. This is Bloodstone Jewel. When you gain a Bloodstone Jewel for the first time your turn, gain 3 Ether, and then gain 3 Ether again whenever you play it afterwards. And these are only 3 of like several gems and cards that they provide for you. This is just the set they recommend you start with for your first game in War Eternal. Relics are cards that have a wide variety of uses. Like here's the Mage's Totem. It's a 2-cost card. This lets you destroy a gem or relic you play this turn, or destroy this card and Gravehold gains a life. If Gravehold's in trouble, you can use it to heal it, or if you want to reduce your deck and make it thinner for a more effective deck. Here is a Primordial Fetish. It's a 4-cost. Focus any player's breach. I'll explain what that is in a second. Or destroy it and gain 3 life if you need HP. And then finally we have spell cards. These are the primary ways to attack your nemesis and his minions. So you have like Jagged Lightning here. It's a 4-cost. If you cast it, it deals 3 damage. You may discard a card in your hand. If you do, any player focuses their closed breach with the lowest focus cost. Before I go into any other spells, let's start going into the mechanics of the game of what focusing is and that sort of thing. So like I mentioned before, Aeon's End War Eternal has a variable turn order, which means you randomly see who goes from this deck. So theoretically, you could actually go twice in a row if your card is pulled twice. In this case, player 1 would go first. After player 1's done, reveal it. Oh, Nemesis goes next. But let's go through a player turn, what a player can do. So let's say player 1 is going to have a turn. So first off is the casting phase. You may cast any of your prepped spells in open breaches, like this yellow one, and you must cast any prepped spells on closed breaches, like these. And then whenever you cast a spell, you discard them in your discard pile. So let's pretend that Mist here had an Aurora prepped already. She would fire the spell, and then it would do... Well, prepped once per turn during your main phase, you may gain 1 charge. Well, that's during your main phase. But it does 3 damage. It would do 3 damage to an enemy, and once she casts it, it's discarded. The spell can only deal damage to a single minion or the nemesis unless otherwise specified. Some breaches have a +1 damage on cast effect while they're open. So if I cast a spark from this, it would actually do 2 damage. Then it's time for your main phase. You can resolve the following actions in any order and as many times as you want. I'm not going to go through each of them. You can play a gem or relic card. Here's like Mist's special gem, the Amethyst Paragon. She gains an ether, and any ally may prep a spell in hand to their opened or closed breaches. So this would let your partner prep a spell if he or she or they had one and could just put one on there. You can also gain a card. So this turn, Mist would have 4 ether, so she could purchase any card she wanted. Let's say she purchases a Jagged Lightning, and then she would put it straight in her discard pile once purchased. You can gain ether even if you don't spend it, but whatever ether you don't spend, that turn is lost. You don't get to accumulate them over turns. You can also gain a charge. Charging costs 2 ether. So let's say instead of buying this, she charges twice. Her ability is Exalted Brand. Cast up to 3 different spells prepped by any number of players. For each spell cast this way, place that spell into any ally's hand. So to use this ability, she has charge slots, 6 charge slots. So to get ready for that, she could charge it up twice using 4 ether, since it's 2 ether per slot. Another thing she could do is focus a breach. Different breaches cost different amounts of ether to focus them. So let's say for breach number 2, it's here, it says 2 ether to focus it. So you could tap it 90 degrees, so it's closer to opening, which I'll explain open and close breaches later. But yeah, this one costs 2 ether to focus. This one would cost 3 to focus. You want these breaches to be open because they offer you more flexibility. And in the cases of breaches 3 and 4, they give you more damage. This one's +1 damage on cast. So instead of charging, she could maybe focus this twice. She could actually focus it and then open it, which is another action you can do. As you can see here, it says 2 ether to open. Bam. Now it's an open breach. Or if she had enough ether, she could just straight up open a breach. So this one, let's say she didn't focus it. It's 3 ether to open it. She could just spend 3 ether and immediately open it. This one would cost 7, but as you can see, the more you focus them, the cheaper it is to open them. And another action you can do is prep a spell. If I have an open breach, I can prep a spell freely to it. If I have a closed breach, I can only prep a spell to it if I focused it that turn. If I focus it, then I can do a spell. But the thing with closed breaches is on your next turn at the beginning of your casting phase, these have to fire. And unlike a lot of other deck building games or board games, these are prepped. So you don't fire these during your turn. You prep them so that at the beginning of your next turn, all your spells will fire. So she's got a bunch of different options: buying cards, playing cards, charging, focusing, opening breaches, prepping spells. But after she's all done with everything, everything she played that turn will get discarded into her discard pile, and she can choose what order she discards these in. Well, here's like a spark. She could prep the spark, spend these 4 cards and get 4 ether, and let's say she puts them in this order. She can choose the order because you don't shuffle your deck in this game. So maybe she wants this card to come sooner, so she could put it like that. or you could pair certain cards together because you know they work well together. And then once you've done all your actions, you draw 5 cards. You may not choose to discard cards during your turn. Unlike other deck builders, you don't discard your hand at the end of each turn. So let's say I didn't use the Spark by prepping it or anything. I have to keep it in my hand and only draw 4. Once you run out of cards here, you simply take your discard pile and flip it over. Well, with all the cards. There you go. So you can actually see what's coming next if you look through your discard pile before you flip it. If she ever runs out of HP, she is exhausted, which I'll explain later. Now let's put some minions on the board so you can just see how damage works. Like here's a grubber, ew. He's got 5 HP. So if I cast a spell that did 2 damage, let's say I could target a minion and take 2 damage off of him, or I could target the Nemesis itself and take it down to 68. Beating the Nemesis is one of the ways to win the game. So you have to choose if you want to go after minions, because minions can hurt you every turn, or target the boss. If a minion runs out of life tokens, they're immediately discarded. If you get the Nemesis down to 0, you immediately win. So that's how a player's turn works, but let's see how the Nemesis works. First, before anything, you do the main phase, and what you do is you resolve the effects of each minion and power card the Nemesis has in play. So let's say we had, let's pull out a card. Here's a power card and a minion, and you resolve them from oldest to newest, so actually it would be like this. First off, Grubber's persistent effect is if the Nemesis has 2 turn order cards in the turn order discard pile, Umber Titan loses a Nemesis token. Otherwise, Gravehold suffers 2 damage. So he can remove a token from the boss or attack the city. And he does this every time the Nemesis has a turn. So that's why you have an incentive to destroy these, because otherwise they're going to keep doing these every time. This is a power card. I'll explain these a little bit later, but you would remove one of these power tokens off of it. And once it runs out, it'll trigger a bad thing. Then after you've triggered all of the Nemesis cards in play, you draw a new Nemesis card. So let's say it was this one. This one is Unleash. I'll explain Unleashing in a second. Reveal the top card of the turn order deck. If a player turn order card was revealed, that player suffers 2 damage. Otherwise, Gravehold suffers 3 damage. I forgot to mention, if Gravehold ever runs out of HP, you instantly lose. So this is an attack card and you resolve these immediately. But if it was another minion or power card, you would put it in play, and the next turn for the Nemesis, they would trigger. And so these can really pile up if you don't take them out. Power cards have this unique thing where each turn they're triggered, they lose these and then they eventually fire. Like this one, Umbra Titan would lose 2 Nemesis tokens. But players can also discard these early by doing whatever the 2 discard action is. So this one is spend 6 ether. So if someone spends 6 ether on their turn, they can discard the card so that it doesn't hurt the players. And let me explain what Unleashing and Nemesis tokens are. So every Nemesis works differently. In this case, Umbra Titan gains 8 Nemesis tokens to start. Whenever the Unleash keyword triggers, if there is one Nemesis turn order card in the turn order discard pile, any player suffers 2 damage. If there are 2 Nemesis turn order cards in the turn order discard pile, Gravehold suffers 2 damage, or he loses a Nemesis token. When he has 0 Nemesis tokens, you just lose the game. So it's kind of like a ticker, a ticking time bomb to try to defeat this. And minions like the Grubber will make it so that you're more likely to lose tokens if you have a lot of Nemesis turn order cards in the turn order discard pile. Now let's go over Exhaustion. If you run out of HP, you are exhausted. What happens then is you resolve the Nemesis Unleash effect twice, then you destroy one of your breaches, discarding any spells prepped to it, so this would be gone. There's no way to regain those. And you discard any charges you might have. You can still keep playing during the game, but you can't gain any more HP. If a card deals damage to the player with the lowest life, it always deals that damage to the non-exhausted player with the lowest current life. And if you ever suffer damage, that does twice the amount of damage to Gravehold. So you become like a damage sponge for or damage gun to shoot Gravehold with if you get hit. And if all players are exhausted, you immediately lose. So yeah, if Gravehold dies or if the players are all exhausted, you lose. If you defeat the Nemesis, you win. You can also win the game if you get through the entire Nemesis deck and defeat all the minions and powers in play. So if there are just no more cards left, you win, but that's very hard to do. Otherwise, that's pretty much the game. On your turn, cast spells at the start, buy cards, get charges, use your abilities, that sort of thing. Build up your deck, defeat minions, and the minion and the Nemesis will send out minions and attacks and traps to try to beat you up. And that's the game. Now, before I end here, I'll show you the other 2 spells I didn't go over from that pile. There are still a bunch more gems and relics and spells in the box. I'm not going to go through every single one. But here we have Nova Forge. When prepped, once per turn during your main phase, you may gain 2 ether that can be used to gain a spell. And it does 4 damage. That gives you some extra spell buying currency. And this one's an 8 cost Crystallize. This spell must be prepped to 2 adjacent breaches, so it touches both of them, and it fully occupies both. And when you cast it, any ally reveals their hand, and you deal 2 damage for each gem in that ally's hand. Other than that, I don't want to go too much into detail on the Umber Titan deck. I think it's more fun to kind of discover the cards in here as you go. But I will be going over some of the mages and bosses exclusive to War Eternal after this. So I already went over Mist earlier in the rules explanation. Well, let's look at some of the other characters. We got Jan Magda. Jan Magda, gain a card from any supply pile. If you have 4 open breaches, any ally gains a card from any supply pile and places it on top of their deck. So she's all about getting more cards straight from the piles. Mazahedron, you may gain a gem that costs 4 ether or less from any supply pile. And Gravehold gains 4 life, so he can heal the city and get gems, and he only needs 4 charges for that. Desmodia, any player destroys an opened 1 or 2 breach and returns any spells prepped to that breach to their hand. Then they gain a Sigil breach, which I'll show you in a second, and places it where the destroyed breach was. Then that player may prep a spell from their hand to a breach. So yeah, she comes with Sigil breaches, and these do +2 damage when you cast spells off of them, which are pretty nice. Here's Gex. She's missing a breach here. She only has 3 breaches. And she is Vimcraft Oath. Destroy up to 2 cards in your discard pile that cost 0 ether, and any ally draws 1 card and gains 2 life. So she can thin out her deck. Here we've got Ulgamore, who looks very distressed here. Eidolon Shroud, gains 6 life. If you're exhausted, any ally gains 5 life instead. So he can heal himself and also potentially heal others if he's exhausted. Here we've got Garu. Colossal Force. Discard up to 4 of your prepped spells. Deal 2 damage plus 4 additional damage for each spell you discarded. Divide it however you choose to the nemesis or any number of minions. So he can actually attack or divide his damage amongst monsters. And also just get rid of, like, you could use up sparks or whatever with that. And here's Quilius. Quilius deals 2 damage for each trophy token that he has. And here's a trophy token, and Quilius has like a card that lets you get these. And we got some bosses. I already went over Umbra Titan. I'm not going to go through all these in huge detail, but just kind of go over what they do. Here's the Gate Witch. How she uses her Nemesis tokens is if she has 5 or more Nemesis tokens on her, and there's 1 Nemesis turn order card in the discard pile, it accelerates time, and you can shuffle that Nemesis card back into the deck. So she gets extra turns, which sucks. Here's Magus of Cloaks. He can either gain 2 Nemesis tokens or Gravehold suffers 2 damage when he gets tokens. This guy uses Nemesis tokens as like a shield. So if he's ever dealt damage, you reduce the damage by the number of tokens he has, then he only loses 1. So he can have up to 8 tokens. So potentially he could block like 8 damage and only lose 1 of those off his shield. His HP is pretty low though. And then here's Hollow Crown, which this is an interesting one. They have an Acolyte deck, and they start drawing these Acolyte cards. Because you can't deal damage to Hollow Crown. You have to defeat all the Acolytes. If you defeat them, you win the game. Alright, so spoiler alert, AEON'S and its sequels were the #1 board game I played in 2019. Suffice it to say, I love this game. I have every expansion that's been released. I have played through AEON'S End Legacy, and I intend to defeat every boss in the game. So, yeah, you can say I enjoy the game, but let me break down why I like it so much. First off, I love how everything you're doing feels like you're improving in a satisfying way. Opening up breaches by focusing them, or opening them up to fire more spells or more powerful spells, or charging your ability, or buying cards. There's a lot you can do with the ether currency, and it's essential to choose wisely, but you have so many choices on how you want to approach combat. The turn order deck is a fun way to surprise you on whose turn it is, and while it may seem random because, yeah, you're drawing cards from a deck, what's interesting about it is it can give you a surprising amount of control. Yes, it's thrilling if you need someone to be next. Like, let's say, oh god, we need player 2 to go because she's got, like, several spells lined up and we need it, and if that's revealed, it's great. Or if it can be kind of horrifying if the Nemesis gets a second turn in a row. But what's interesting is that once the card has been revealed, you know what the other cards are left in the deck. You know, okay, a Nemesis card was pulled. That means there's 2-player 1, 2-player 2, 1 nemesis. And you can kind of plan around that because you know the information of what's in that deck. It's the only deck in the entire game that you shuffle, but it adds a lot to the game. And speaking of shuffling, I love that you don't shuffle your decks. That was the initial mechanic that attracted me to the game, and it works magnificently. There's a good amount of strategy in deciding how you want to place your cards in your discard pile. You want to group certain cards together? This game can let you do that. Want to ensure a certain card is on top for the next time? You can do that too. I actually also really like the mechanic of prepping spells and firing them next turn. It takes a little getting used to it first, because everyone's used to like, oh, you play a card, bam, attack, attack, attack. But this adds an interesting twist to the gameplay, because you're preparing for your next turn starting attack. Meaning you have to be kind of flexible, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen between your end of your turn and the beginning of your next turn. Like maybe the nemesis will do some shit. You don't know. It does give you this sense, though, of, okay, on my next turn, if everything goes smoothly, I can do this much damage. And you can kind of plan ahead with that. And you go, okay, like player 2 has that much damage, I've got this much damage. All right, on your turn, you fire those spells on those monsters, and on my turn, I'll fire this on the nemesis and this monster. The game is tough, and I really enjoy that. The nemesis are no joke. They're constantly throwing tough enemies at you, and pretty much every card you pull from the deck is super mean and punches you right in the dick. But that makes the co-op so fun and essential. I prefer this game with 2 players. You can do it with up to 4, and there's like different sort of ways you can manage that with the turn order deck. But I love just the constant back and forth between 2. There's always this discussion of, okay, if you charge that, you can heal me, and then I can do this damage to the enemy, and on the next turn, you kill it, and you have to work together and play smart. This is not a game you can just kind of like, oh, we'll just do this and this for fun. You have to plan very strategically. Otherwise, the bosses and the minions will absolutely obliterate you. It can be pretty punishing, but when you finally defeat the boss, there's this huge sense of achievement and relief every single time. Now, the question is, should you start with War Eternal versus the original Aeon's End? I think both are quite good. War Eternal has a little more complexity to its cards and its powers. So if you, let's say, are new to deck building, I would say start with Aeon's End. And then if you like Aeon's End, War Eternal is just a shoo-in. Like, absolutely get War Eternal as well. There's great content in there. But if you're like, you know, I can handle it, you can jump right into War Eternal. It's almost the same game, just a little more complex, but there's not like any crazy keywords. I think there might be one new keyword, but I think that was introduced in an expansion as opposed to War Eternal. I'm not sure about that off the top of my head. But yeah, nothing too crazy. The expansions add a lot of interesting stuff that are kind of like a little wilder. But War Eternal just feels like a slightly more advanced Aeon's End. I mean, I recommend both if you're interested. Either one, though, you can start with if you're experienced with deck building. But yes, Aeon's End, definitely one of my favorite games of all time, I think. Every time I play it, I'm always reminded of how much I enjoy it. And I highly recommend it if you love deck building, if you love really good co-op, and you just love the combination of the two. This is an absolute recommendation, one of the highest recommendations I can give. It's great.